From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. President Biden rolls out the red carpet for Kenyan President Ruto as the official state visit continues today at the White House, reinforcing their alliance. In a joint news conference earlier, we'll look at the takeaways and we'll look ahead to tonight's state dinner with our political panel. Pressure escalating meantime in Gaza as the struggle continues to get humanitarian aid into the right hands. David Miliband from the International Rescue Committee joins us to talk solutions this hour. And the world watches China conducting military drills around Taiwan as a so-called punishment for swearing in its new president. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, ranking member of the House China Select Committee, weighs in on what exactly this means for U.S.-China relations. Thank you for joining us on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power, live from Washington here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We begin at the White House and the state visit of Kenyan President Ruto, who held a joint news conference, as I mentioned, a short time ago with President Biden, in which they spoke about the strength of the partnership between the two countries. Here's President Biden from earlier in the day.
We're celebrating 60 years of a solid relationship between Kenya and the United States, built firmly on the foundation of shared values, which we cherish, of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights. And we're very proud of the relationship that we have built.
That's where we start, from the Oval Office here to our table at Balance of Power with Bloomberg's Washington Bureau Chief Peggy Collins. It's good to see you, Peggy. Thank you for joining us. There's something festive about the day of a state visit and a state dinner in the air around the White House in Washington, but there was serious business to be had. The first visit of an African nation to get this type of treatment at the White House in 16 years. And the president did make news, President Biden designating Kenya a major non-NATO ally. Put this in perspective for us, the significance of this moment.
Well, I think it is significant, Joe, and they have done a lot of outreach to Africa over the past year. Some cabinet secretaries, Vice President Harris has visited, now, of course, the state dinner. I think there's a couple of takeaways here. One is that the administration really does see Africa as key to their foreign policy initiatives. There's a lot of economic growth potential and population growth potential in Africa forecast for the years and decades ahead. It's also a key counter to China. A lot of our policy has been around, in terms of foreign policy, and our geoeconomics have centered around the relationship between U.S. and China. And Africa is at a crossroads between both of those. So I think we're seeing the Biden administration recognize that economic growth potential in Africa, but also the ability to strengthen the ties that we have to nations there in order to shore up our supply chains and our economic growth as well.
Well, it's really interesting the way you frame that, because there were many audiences for that news conference today and for what we saw as their Oval Office meeting, which extended well beyond the allotted time. To your point, China was watching. Of course, African nations were watching, and so were our allies elsewhere around the world. There were other deliverables, $250 billion in new lending, new tech cooperation that would actually see money from the CHIPS Act going to an African nation for the first time. Was there enough to show for this visit when it came to the takeaways here versus the photo opportunity?
Well, it's so interesting that you brought up the CHIPS Act, because they did make an announcement about how we're going to try to put money into Africa around semiconductor chips, technology there to shore up supply chains. But so much of the conversation around chips has been around nearshoring them, bringing it back home to making them in the U.S. And this is really saying, hey, we can shore up our supply chains in places like Africa, again, to lessen our dependence on places like Taiwan, but also to counter China on this incredibly important technological area. So, and you mentioned debt, Joe. I think that's another big thing for developing nations, and certainly for Africa, where the U.S. is saying, hey, we need to provide more lending and make sure that poorer countries are not going so far in debt that they can't get themselves out of it.
Is the private sector the answer to that? The president gathered a bunch of executives from Fortune 500 companies and some familiar names yesterday. We had Alphabet there. We had private capital represented in the room. industrial companies. There was even an infrastructure deal with a Virginia company that was announced earlier today. Is that the answer to debt from Belt and Road, or is it U.S. government aid as well?
Well, I think a lot of people would say you need both, right? That the private and public partnership is really going to be the wave of the future for a lot of these big problems that need solutions. But I do think the private sector, oftentimes to lend to more risky countries or areas, they definitely need some type of government floor, for lack of a better word, to feel like the government may back them up and help them to take more risk. But other people will say the private sector should just step in more no matter what because of the potential for growth. Yeah,
they'll be lining up for the big state dinner. I guess the tent on the South Lawn. Do you see the menu? Looks pretty great.
You know what? We could go over, Joe, and just see if we can get a last-minute ticket.
If you can get me in, I'm with you after this. I'm done at 6 o'clock. No ice cream on the menu. Fascinating for the Biden White House. Peggy Collins, thank you so much for your great reporting and leadership in the Washington Bureau as we turn to Capitol Hill. The Senate failing to pass a bipartisan border bill for the second time this afternoon. Senator Chuck Schumer blasted Republicans afterwards.
We're here again. Just like 3 months ago, Senate Republicans rejected the strongest and most comprehensive bipartisan border security bill Congress has seen in a whole generation. It's a sad day for the Senate, a sad day for America.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy now. I know you're shocked this didn't pass. So what are we saying here? This is just a messaging bill all along?
Yeah, looking at Senator Schumer there, he clearly knew this was a doomed exercise. But there is
a purpose, though.
There is a purpose. And look, this is the same bill that they brought up some months ago. What we saw in our Bloomberg News poll that we do with Morning Consult of swing state voters after they did this the last time is that they did make some inroads in at least shifting some of the blame away from President Biden and Democrats in Congress on this immigration issue of these droves of people coming over the U.S.-Mexico border, and not diminishing the Democratic blame, but adding to the Republican blame and making it a bipartisan problem. Once they've used that trick once, it's hard to get it to work again, although I would not rule out Senator Schumer or perhaps someone else trying once again to highlight that it's really Trump, former President Trump, and Republicans who are being obstructionists here, despite the fact that this is the issue, or perhaps because this is the issue they want to run on in November.
Well, it's just it's the reason why people hate Washington in some cases. When you see someone like Jim Lankford, a serious lawmaker and a very conservative Republican from Oklahoma, who put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this compromise, tried to sell it to his colleagues and the American people, failed months ago when that happened, to come back now and vote against it and to talk about this. I think he described it as picking up weapons. It's not even real legislation anymore. How do you have the same person craft it? It's his baby and then divorce himself from it like that.
We talked about
Donald Trump.
We talked about this the first time. This is a bill that 6 months ago or a year ago, Republicans would have taken in a second. The only thing that's changed is the election year dynamics here. And this is an issue that Republicans clearly want to win on, giving President Biden a win on immigration. And let's not let President Biden off the hook too easy either. He has had a change of heart on this issue as well.
Sure.
And there's just a little bit of
punished for it.
Well, he's trying to use a little bit of election year jiu-jitsu to switch the impetus back on Republicans. It has worked to an extent. It probably won't get him completely off the hook.
I'd love to bring Peggy back in because we can't let Peggy Collins go away that easily. You're the bureau chief in Washington. You see big picture, 30,000-foot view here in Washington. This is messaging legislation for the rest of this Congress? Is that what we're in for as opposed to real lawmaking?
Well, I think there's such a close tie between the two legislative bodies in the sense that everything they say and everything they do, they're trying to message, but they also can't get a lot done, right? And the closer we get to the election, there's going to be less and less that they can get done because of all the partisan politics in it. So I think that's where a lot of the messaging comes in. They feel like they've got to message because they can't actually get a lot of legislative work done. Understood.
And even though there is some work to be done, the Farm Bill is one example. I don't know if we can spin back the comment from Joni Ernst the other day, but it was pretty interesting to think that something that was never a controversial moment could get to the point now where, again, it probably can't pass. The Republican from Iowa in talking about her own agriculture state, but also the stakes here, had this to say about the Farm Bill on Bloomberg.
We are really struggling with the Farm Bill this year, and it is a $1.5 trillion price tag in the United States Senate, but only about 14 to 15% of that goes to farm programs. We need to rename the bill. We're not going to pass it this year. We'll take another shot early next year. We'll have to extend the 2018 Farm Bill.
So that kind of reinforces the point, right? It goes back to what you just said. We're in an election cycle. Check back after November.
So it's surprising, though, the extent that the Farm Bill has always been one of the more bipartisan pieces of legislation to come through Congress.
We're talking about food stamps here.
The agricultural committees have always had a pretty good relationship from one side of the aisle to the other. But we are in an election year, and also inflation is really one of the drivers of the tensions here, because you have Republicans saying, look, if farmers are struggling because of the cost of the inputs, the commodities, the fuel, the seeds, the fertilizer they need to grow these crops, we need to increase the subsidies. They're going to take the money from SNAP, from food stamps. Obviously, Democrats don't like the sound of that, and so it's really created this tension where the money's got to come from somewhere, and that's what's sort of grinding down these negotiations.
No doubt, and that tension lasts in the longest general election cycle of our lives. Gregory Cordy, thank you, and again, Peggy Collins for a great conversation. Coming up, my conversation with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. It's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thank you for joining us on the Thursday edition. We have breaking news on the terminal at Bloomberg as the SEC approves plans from the New York Stock Exchange, the CBOE, and the NASDAQ for spot Ether ETFs, crypto maturing before our eyes. Just this day after crypto market framework legislation passed the House of Representatives. Worth noting here, and we'll have more on this, of course, on Bloomberg TV and radio as we learn more. Turning to U.S. domestic politics and the campaign trail this day after Nikki Haley announced her intention to vote for Donald Trump without what appeared to be a full endorsement. I sat down with her biggest supporter a short time ago, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, and started him by asking about this news, that Haley will vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming election, and whether that was an endorsement. Here's what he said.
It's so funny. People will say, well, if you're voting for them, are you endorsing them? Are you supporting them? Are you campaigning with them?
Is there a difference?
I think I would never speak for Nikki Haley, but like myself, we're going to vote for her. Obviously, we have a lot of complaints about Donald Trump, as a lot of folks do.
I know.
But elections are about choices. They really are. It's A or B. You don't have to be all or one. You don't have to be extreme one way or the other. But if you want democracy to work, you got to get out there and vote. And a lot of folks are saying, gee, we don't like the bombastic style of Trump. We don't like the chaos. But we need a change. We need results. We need somebody to do something about inflation, about the border. Those are the top issues. And I think Nikki did a great job kind of pointing that out, that, look, people care about issues. You have to talk about these issues. You can't just kind of say, we know you have record credit card debt, but ignore that. You're all fine. Bidenomics is working. It's not, right? And so we call that gaslighting, right? Basically not validating the reality that a lot of individuals are feeling right now. And if anything, that's where I think Biden has really kind of screwed this thing up.
Well,
it's not just about policy. It's telling people that it's working when it's clearly not.
Understood. Some would say as well, with Donald Trump's association with the economy that we see bearing out in the polls, that doesn't match with his record on the deficit, for instance, either, which I know is a big issue for you and a big issue for Nikki Haley. Yeah. Did you help her work through this? Did you arrive at this decision together?
No. I love Nikki. I think she's the best. I wanted, since she got out of the race, I wanted her to be nothing but happy, spending some time with her family. Her husband finally got home after nearly a year-long deployment, so I know she's spending a lot of time with him, and that's been wonderful. She came out and, she had an event yesterday and was asked, and she said she was going to vote for Trump. Yes. But I think she also made a really critical point, which was there's still a lot of voters out there that have to be earned, and Trump has to do some work. He's got to do some work on the issues. He's got to do some work to make sure that all those folks that may not have voted for him in the primary on the Republican side are going to come home. And they're not going to do it just because He's got to go earn them. But there's time for him to do that. Biden has a bigger challenge on his hands, I think, in that I think Biden's base has walked from him more than the Trump base has walked from Trump. I think independents are walking away from Biden. I think the younger voters that really should be all with Biden right now, a lot of them just won't vote. So Biden has his own set of chores in the next 6 months.
Well, that's clear, and it's bearing out in our own polling here at Bloomberg. And my God, the Trump base won't budge, even as he sits in criminal court. But she said more than, as you point out, more than just that she was going to vote for him. There was one particular line that stuck out to me. A loud part, she said, of each party wants us to abandon our allies, appease our enemies, and focus only on the problems we have at home. She said this worldview has already put America in great danger, and the threat is mounting by the day. That sounds like she's speaking to Donald Trump. Who's the audience there?
Well, so a couple things. When it comes to foreign policy, appreciating that you get world peace through America's strength, I think there's no one better in understanding those issues than Nikki Haley. So I think she's just spot on.
Is she worried
with
about
those
this protectionist bent in the Republican Party?
It's not just the Republican Party. Look, when you look at folks that say international issues are the most important, it's about a 50-50 split. Those who think Trump portrays an image of strength that Biden doesn't portray. I think some of Biden's policies were more in line with where we should be, but he doesn't portray the strength. He's kind of gone back and forth on Israel, right? I'm a big supporter of Israel. Got to stand with him unquestionably. He was unquestionably with him on May 7th, and on May 8th, he's like, by the way, we're going to withhold weapons. So you can't have your foot half in and half out. Yeah. That kind of inconsistency is a problem for Biden. I think some of Trump's statements, quasi-supportive of Putin and calling him this smart guy and all of that sort of thing, that stuff scares people as well. So I think they both have a lot of problems on the international front.
Well, this is an interesting view to hear from you on both of these, because, it's supposed to be my job to try to make you turn into a pretzel to explain to me why you want to vote for Donald Trump or plan to vote for Donald Trump.
Of course.
After effectively mounting a strong campaign against him and helping Nikki Haley. You've already done that interview. I want to bring it back to the Snowshoe Club in Concord the night before the primary. And there was hope inside the barn that night that something different, that there was an alternative. And this person, Nikki Haley, had everybody talking as they were drinking by the fire and wondering what might happen the next day after you did a lot of work in the state for her. What happens to those old-line Reagan Republicans? What happens to the donors who followed Nikki Haley or the suburban women who support still, and by the way, some early primaries that we've seen, they're still showing up in primaries for Nikki Haley? Do they stay home? Or do you tell them to?
I think the majority of them will come over and vote for Trump. But I think Nikki made a great point. There's still a lot of them and that have to be earned. And I go back to that point. It's not that they can't be earned. Will the donor base come over to Trump? Probably not. Not like they had in the past. No? I don't think so. I think a lot of the significant Republican donor base is going to put their money into the Senate seats, the governorships, the congressional races, really trying to drive that home there. Trump has kind of co-opted a bit the RNC to be his kind of donor feeder system, but they've had some success. I don't think it's going to be like it was back in 2016 and even in 2020. The voters themselves, though, those are the ones that have to be spoken to, and there's plenty of time for Trump to do that if he wants to earn them on the Republican side. Like I said, I don't think there's any policy changes Biden could implement today to get an appreciable different result that would drive people back over to him. So Biden's in a tougher position right now, where it goes with everyone's looking at the trials, right?
Sure.
I don't think the trials have an appreciable difference in this campaign.
What if there's a conviction? Does that feel different?
No. Look, I'll say this. Three things are going to happen. He's either innocent, and that's a big win for Trump, because not only would he be off on this one, but he would then claim that all the others are politically motivated, and it would put a shadow of a doubt on all of them. Same with a hung jury. He probably gets the same result. A conviction, people say, I just don't think it's going to drive people away from him. And if you are driven away by that, I respect your right to say that that's a line too far if he's convicted.
Would it keep independents away from him?
No, I don't think so, because independents...
They break Trump even with a conviction.
If they've already broken away from Biden, it's because they don't like the convictions, they don't like January 6th, they don't like election denial, but they are getting crushed by inflation. Inflation is the issue of the day. There's no question about it. And the border, those are still remain to be the top two issues. And those are really bad when Biden doesn't do well with those at all.
You can find my full conversation with Governor Sununu from New Hampshire on the terminal and online. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Kenyan President William Ruto is on a 3-day visit here to Washington. This is day 3, which he spent largely at the White House after meeting yesterday with congressional leaders and executives, potential investors as well. Tonight, the finale with the full state dinner on the South Lawn. Trade has been a major issue. And Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is here now with more on that. What do we learn, Tyler?
Yeah. Hey, Joe. So it was interesting because President Biden decided to kick off this state visit by inviting executives from both Kenyan and U.S.-based companies to the White House to sit down with the Kenyan president, who came into this visit saying that he was looking for some tangibles when it came to strategic investment in his country. That even included the CFO of Google's parent company, Alphabet there. So some really big names there gearing up for this investment. And earlier we heard from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and he was talking about this push by the U.S. to renew a partnership between Silicon Valley and what's being called the Silicon Savannah.
Emerging technology hub. And so you can expect announcements about new investments in partnership in digital technologies and emerging technologies.
It's a welcome sentiment for the Kenyan President William Ruto, and it appears to already be gaining some steam. Today, the Kenyan government announced a $3.6 billion infrastructure investment that's coming from a Virginia-based fund known as Everstrong Holdings. Joe, this is just part of this broader push by the Kenyan government to get this sort of investment and a broader push for competition across the continent of Africa. You've been talking about this all day, this idea that the U.S. and China are competing when it comes to infrastructure and strategic investment across Canada, across Africa. You and I were talking about this earlier today. We were looking at those numbers, and it turns out that China is actually outpacing the U.S. significantly when it comes from foreign direct investment, and that turn came in 2013, which happens to be the exact same year that China launched its Belt and Road initiative, which spurred, as you know, all those infrastructure projects across the continent.
And a lot of debt is what we're hearing Kenya is left with. We're almost out of time here, Tyler, but you talk about the competition. It's the same industries we get into every time we mention China. AI, chips, semiconductors, cybersecurity. Same today.
Chips are very important here because Bloomberg News has learned from a White House official that President Biden is going to push to make Kenya the first African country to actually receive funds from the Chips and Science Act, that bipartisan bill to help shore up our own domestic semiconductor production. So we'll be looking for tangibles there that could help make Kenya a tech partner in this.
I guess that counts as friend shoring, if not onshoring, right? Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. Coming up on Balance of Power, Democratic Congressman Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. He's the ranking member on the House China Select Committee with an eye on the Taiwan Strait. Next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
President Biden has made clear that he will take action to stand up for American workers and companies. And last week, the United States announced strategic and targeted steps in key sectors to respond to unfair trade practices by the PRC.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen earlier today at the G7 summit in Italy, where she talked about the steps the U.S. is taking to combat what she says is unfair trade practices by China. The most bipartisan activity in Washington right now is bashing China. And joining us now is Congressman Krishnamoorthi, the Democrat from Illinois, is importantly the ranking member on the House China Select Committee. And it's great to have you back, Congressman, on Bloomberg, as we anticipate these new tariffs on China. Military drills are taking place right now in the Taiwan Strait as Beijing seeks to punish, in its words, Taiwan for swearing in a new president. When you consider everything in the picture that I just described, from tariffs to drills, is our relationship with China deteriorating further right now?
I don't think it's maybe deteriorating as much as it's continuing to be maybe unresolved. I think that it's really up to Xi Jinping, Joe. I think that he needs to make a decision, which is, does he continue with this policy of aggression and provocative behavior, which could potentially lead to dangerous and catastrophic consequences in the Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea? Or does he pursue an alternative course, which is lowering tensions, lowering aggression, and doing something that would restore stability to the security situation in the Indo-Pacific region, and, oh, by the way, help their own economy, which is tanking right now? I think that's really his decision to make.
Well, as we discuss this, there's a state visit happening a few blocks down the road at the White House. The president of Kenya is here, and China is in every conversation that he is having with world leaders as they try to shake off, in many cases, the debt from Belt and Road and express some buyer's remorse, I think we can say, about years of relations with China. What can the Biden administration do in this meeting today and maybe at this state dinner tonight? I'm assuming that you're going to be there, Congressman, to start turning the tide when it comes to Africa and China.
Well, sadly, I will not be there, but you are absolutely correct that the Chinese Communist Party is the ultimate predator-creditor. And they're worse than a payday loan shop, because they basically, through debt trap diplomacy, have something called the Belt and Road Initiative. And in return for infrastructure projects, for instance, in places throughout Africa, they then obligate these countries to take on massive debt in return for shoddy projects. And now these countries are turning elsewhere, including to the United States. Now it's up to us to make a competitive offering, for instance, through the Development Finance Corporation and other institutions, so that we can assist these countries with economic development without overburdening our own taxpayers, and in the process, helping them and helping us at the same time in creating new markets for our products.
Understood. With that said, I know that you have great concerns from your role on the committee. And what we're going to learn next is something that I would love for you to shed some light on here for our listeners and viewers. We're in a general election right now in this country, and I have been hearing nothing but concerns about misinformation, about deep fakes, about potential election interference by the Chinese. Congressman, what are you hearing on your committee that our audience should know?
Well, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, made it very clear to our committee, plus the Intelligence Committee on which I sit, that the CCP intends to interfere in other countries' elections this year, including our own. There are various platforms that they might use to do that. And so we have to be vigilant in terms of making sure that, A, we protect our election infrastructure, just as we have in the last couple elections through federal and state and local partnerships, and then, B, that we adopt certain best practices that countries like Taiwan and Ukraine have learned in, defending against the misinformation campaigns that, for instance, Russia or China or other countries have utilized to meddle in elections.
A lot of people are saying, Congressman, that the rest of the year will be messaging bills in your House of Representatives. You can tell me if you see it otherwise, but there wasn't even House business for about an hour yesterday in a standoff between Congressman Jim McGovern, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and Republicans in the chamber who chose to silence him after naming the charges that have been levied against Donald Trump. His words were stricken from the record, even though he was not talking about a House member. Earlier today, your Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, had this to say about the incident. Congressman, we'll have you respond. Let's listen.
Apparently, there are people on the other side of the aisle who want to try to silence Jim McGovern because he waxes the floor with them every time he speaks, while at the same time giving Marjorie Taylor Greene free rein to conduct her outrageous behavior.
How do you rationalize those two, Congressman?
Well, I happened to be in that infamous oversight hearing the other night.
You sure
where,
were.
Unfortunately, Marjorie Taylor Greene did engage in a series of performative activities which were outrageous, and I was shocked that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle did not themselves try to strike those words or try to get her to even stop doing what she was doing. And so I think that for them to then come and say somebody else is doing something wrong just seems a little hypocritical. But at the end of the day, I think that neither side, nobody should engage in what's called personalities or ad hominem attacks.
Yes.
I think it's just not what the American people want. That's not why they hired us to be in Congress. I think that our committee, the Select Committee, with regard to the CCP, has offered a potential constructive way in terms of bipartisanship, serious thought. And I think credit, of course, goes to Leader Jeffries and then Speaker McCarthy for the types of people that he named to this committee. And I think that we just need to pursue this track.
Well, you refer to personalities. That's what the House rules say, right? You're not allowed to talk about other personalities who are members of the House on the floor, so it doesn't get to be personal. But Donald Trump is not in the House. Shouldn't it be the other way? Shouldn't Marjorie Taylor Greene's disparaging comments about a colleague be stricken from the record and Congressman McGovern's upheld?
I think so. But on the other hand, I think that right now, I think we should look at the substance of what the American people want us to do. And I think that, again, Leader Jeffries has asked us as a caucus to really focus on those kitchen table topics and those items that, Americans and our constituents want us to work on, whether it's, reducing the cost of health care and education or enabling them to have jobs of the future, which is what our committee is trying to do in winning the strategic competition between the U.S. and the CCP.
So neither of us can believe we're talking about this right now. I think we can agree.
I think that, let's just say that there are some bigger fish to fry. And I think the American people want us to get to the business of that.
I appreciate that, Congressman. I'm sorry you're not at the dinner tonight. I was going to ask you how dinner was. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, ranking member of the China Select Committee. We thank you for being with us. Coming up, our political panel will join us to break down President Biden's visit from Kenya's president today at the White House. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Today we celebrate 60 years of partnership between Kenya and the United States. And during that time, our partners have gone from delivering for our nations, delivering for the region, I quite frankly think delivering for the world. And it's remarkable. This visit is not just about our history, it's about the future, what we're going to do together. And there's a lot we can and must do together.
President Biden, Kenyan President William Ruto in the Oval Office earlier today. It's on to the state dinner tonight and our political panel right now. Pat Dennis is with us, American Bridge 21st Century President, and Lisa Camuso-Miller, former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Great to see you both here. Pat, we're told that the advantages of incumbency kick in at moments like this. Getting caught in the act of presidenting is in itself a campaign move. How's Joe Biden doing on this visit?
He's doing great. I mean, the important thing to do is be a good president. And having our allies there, really showing them, look, this is what America is all about. You've been, down the road with China and seen what that is like, and now come back to America. And really, Donald Trump has really struggled to communicate with our allies in a way that they find respectful. And that is an understatement, but that is how I'll put it.
Do people care about that, Lisa? When it comes to a meeting like this, everyone's watching these two presidents on the world stage together. It doesn't have anything to do with inflation. It doesn't have anything to do with our southern border, though.
I think as much as I agree with Pat that it's a very presidential move and it's the job that Joe Biden was elected to do, it's not necessarily one that I think will translate to the homes and the voters that are actually going to come out in November. So as much as the president has a lot to do, showing leadership in this place, I think, is very smart and very good and very important. But I also don't think that necessarily this has any impact one way or the other on the election.
Well, it hits at a time when protectionist politics, as we were discussing earlier with Krishnamoorthi, seems to be in some ways creeping into both parties. It's become largely a Republican message at this point. Does expanding alliances in the face of China resonate with Americans right now?
Well, the important thing is doing both, right? It's expanding alliances, showing our friends that we're trustworthy, but at the same time, it's about, it's about showing leadership. It's about onshoring jobs. It's the CHIPS Act, bringing those chip manufacturing facilities back home. And if you're doing both of those at the same time, you're really winning there.
There's more at this as well. There's domestic politics and a demographic that this president has been struggling to regain ground with, which has been borne out in our polling here at Bloomberg and in other places. You're going to see bold faces from business and entertainment in the black community gathered tonight at the White House for the state dinner. The optics are going to be huge tomorrow. When all the morning shows roll out the pictures, people will wake up to them on their Twitter scroll. That's a campaign in action as well, isn't it?
It is. And look, Joe Biden, in a lot of ways, owes his presidency to the black community. And that is a relationship that goes back 40 years. Joe Biden has really worked to deliver for folks, not just the black community, but working people all across the country, the middle class all across the country. And this is just another part of that.
All the while, Donald Trump bags $40 million in an afternoon. This is a news story just hit our terminal, Lisa. Oil executives pumping $40 million into this one-day haul, which makes it one of the most lucrative days, certainly for the Trump campaign, and I guess one of the most lucrative days in presidential campaign history. But this took place at the Post Oak Hotel, 700,000 square feet, I read. Owned by Tillman Fertitta, houses a Rolls-Royce dealership and is topped with a helicopter pad. Is that how we relate with the people?
It's how you raise money that you need to raise, right, Joe? Mm-hmm. And I think, too, everything that you're hearing out of the former president's mouth is they're the kinds of policies and the kinds of leadership that industry is actually looking for. They're looking for predictability. They're looking for some sense of where things will be going under the Trump administration. And I certainly think that the oil industry probably feels pretty good about Donald Trump being in the White House as opposed to Joe Biden.
Well, there was this story from the Washington Post that he had suggested he would do anything for the oil industry for $1 billion. This is not quite $1 billion. Where's Joe Biden with the oil and gas industry on the campaign trail?
Well, here's what Donald Trump did. He went to the oil industry and he said, look, give me $1 billion and I'll roll back all the clean air, clean water regulations that people really care about across the country. People do not want an incredible amount of pollution, but they also don't want their candidates going to wealthy business interests and saying, give me money and I'll give you what you want. Because what you should actually be doing, and I know this is Politics 101, is delivering for the middle class and working Americans.
Well, it's funny, though, the way this has turned into a mainstream talking point. Remember, he said, I'll be dictator for a day just so I can drill, baby, drill. That resonates with someone. Who's the voter who says that's what I want right now because it means lower gas prices?
It's the middle class. It's the people in the middle of the country. I mean, to Pat's point, it's definitely a message that doesn't necessarily resonate, but it's what people expect. They expect politicians to go to these fancy hotels and raise money. I think that I don't know that they want it, but that's what they think of politicians. I think that that's the perception they have. So I don't think that necessarily it's going to take away or give really for anything other than into Donald Trump's coffers for.
Well, the alternative is Radio City with Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and Queen Latifah and Lizzo. That was one already we saw, and apparently the Biden campaign is going to try this again. There's going to be a Hollywood Bowl edition or something on the West Coast. That's Joe Biden's version of this. Is mixing with celebrities and being the Hollywood guy going to resonate with middle America as well?
Well, the important thing is he's not going out there offering business people the policies they want in exchange for money. He's out there working with people who support him, who are popular, who have large audiences, and who can bring votes home. So I think it's pretty different.
That's not a turnoff. I mean, maybe it's a draw. You tell me.
I think it is.
I remember the old celebrity ad that the McCain campaign made. Our colleague Rick Davis had something to do with that. And they put Barack Obama and Paris Hilton in the same ad.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to hurt him.
If I remember correctly, Barack Obama became president.
There you have it from our panel. They're going to stay with us. Pat Dennis, Lisa Camuso-Miller. There was another controversial flag you might have heard. Spotted on a property owned by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. The New York Times reporting this. Our political panel will be back with us after the break on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
In the case of Samuel Alito, he definitively needs to recuse himself from any matter pending before the United States Supreme Court that has to do with the January 6th violent insurrection. He should have no part of it.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries earlier today responding to these reports now of controversial flags. Yeah, there's another. On the property of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. First time was at the home in Alexandria, Virginia. Now it's the beach house. Back with us, our political panel, Pat Dennis, American Bridge 21st Century President, Lisa Camuso-Miller, former RNC Communications Director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Now, I'm supposed to ask both of you guys about congressional investigations, censure potentially coming out of the House. This is a separate branch of government, and nothing is going to happen when it comes to this, just like with Clarence Thomas, right?
Well, what the Supreme Court needs to do is put in a real ethics policy, for example. But he should recuse himself. Alito is showing political bias on
from January 6 cases.
From January 6 cases, and the Trump immunity case is also a really important part of this. The president is asking, or the former president is asking to be above the law, essentially. And somebody who showed this level of bias shouldn't be making those decisions.
I should be probably more specific, but do you guys know about all these flags? Who knew all these flags? So we had the American flag upside down. There's some other flag at the beach house that also represents Stop the Steal. This is different than Clarence Thomas taking lavish vacations, expensive gifts, super yacht trips, and private jets. Should the Supreme Court justice be able to fly whatever flag he wants?
Joe, I think what this really comes down to is it's just another knock on the reputation and the way people feel about the courts, more than anything else. Like, it's taking away from what people want the Supreme Court to be, and they want it to be unbiased, and they want it to not be political. And that has changed. This has changed all of that. So yes, I do. I think that there should not be political statements coming from the Supreme Court and their families. But I guess we're kind of living in a new place with all of this.
Well, I guess that's right. Or maybe we're just learning that you blame the wife, Pat Dennis. That's been the consistent thread here in both of these stories. But here's the scenario that's going to keep you both up tonight. A potential tie in the presidential race. It's borne out in the latest Marquette Law poll today. Trump 50, Biden 50. What if we're in a world in which the Supreme Court is deciding the next president?
That is my nightmare. You're right. I won't be sleeping tonight thinking about that. My organization is focused.
I'm up all night. You can call.
Yeah. My organization is focused on Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Okay. Those are the states that are really going to flip this. That is where we're putting up ads every single day that I think are going to make the case about Trump and hopefully keep us out of that scenario.
I don't know how likely this is, Lisa, but it's something we have to prepare for, isn't it?
I think we have to prepare for that, absolutely. And I think
Either
it seems
House
very
or the
likely.
Supreme Court weighing in on the outcome of a presidential election in this day and age.
Yeah, and it seems to me like it's a constitutional crisis, right? We've been talking about these for the last 6 or 8 years, how we thought that they were going to come to this. But the truth is that we've thought about this for some time, and I think it feels as if maybe we could end up there.
Well, our Bloomberg News poll out this week showed half of swing state voters, including the 3 you mentioned, D's and R's, fear violence around the election. The closer this is, the more likely that gets?
Yeah, I say probably so. But, 2020 wasn't particularly close, and there was violence then, too. And I think
that's a great point.
Donald Trump's, incitement of this is really going to be the defining factor. And we've seen what decision he makes on that front. So.
What's your biggest worry, violence around the conventions or the election itself, if it is, in fact, undecided for days?
Well, I think that the violence alone is what deters people from going to the polls. And if what Pat's saying is true, is that we need all voters to really come out, and we need them to turn out. And that, I think, is the one thing that's a disadvantage to people, is disenfranchising them and having them be worried about going to the polls at all.
You like to think talking about it in advance and making people aware of this might help, as we did earlier with Governor Sununu. This has been uplifting today, hasn't it? Come back and talk to us, I hope, about more uplifting issues. A great panel, however, an important conversation we need to have with Lisa Camusa Miller and Pat Dennis here on Balance of Power. We thank you both. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter for more on all the stories that we talked about today and the interviews you saw and heard on this program, on the terminal and online. This is Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.